Asparagin. I love my asparagus. Asparagin is delicious. It's one of the groups that I really enjoy. Here you have a very basic combination. You have a basic combination of the power of the great, the 34th gate, and the 43rd gate of breakthrough of insight. And when you're looking at those two, first of all, they're individual in their nature. But the first place to begin with is to begin with where the power is. And the power is in the 34th gate in the sacral center, so that we have the first amino acid that's operating out of the sacral, and it's operating out of the primary power gate of the sacral. Obviously the 34, because it has to fuel the integration process, carries with it an enormous amount of energy. You know, it's one of the things that I teach in sexuality about availability is if you have somebody who has the 34th gate active, they're rarely available in that sense because survival is so much a part of their life. They rarely have time, to make love to somebody, to fall in love with somebody, whatever the case may be, because this energy is being called on all the time. And of course, one of the things about the 34th gate is that in and of itself, it's not aware. And of course, what that means is that power and that font of power is just simply there. And it's there to ensure our survivability. Now look, if you're putting all your energy into being busy surviving, there isn't much to life. There just isn't. So one of the things that you have in this combination is that the 43rd gate with its insight finds ways, knows ways in which to use the energy and to use the energy effectively. In other words, let's make it easier to survive. Instead of clubbing your neighbor over the head to steal their cow, let's invent a bow and arrow. Let's invent a pistol. Let's invent a missile. In other words, one of the things about this combination in asparagine is it is about the sophistication of the use of power. In other words, that it isn't always being used for basic survival, but it opens up the opportunity to be able to use our power, our energy, surpluses of energy for other things. Stop being a hunter-gatherer, and simply capture some animals and let them breed inside of a boundary. It saves a tremendous amount of energy. You don't have to go chasing after them all the time. So this is a very important group in terms of the way in which we have developed. In other words, we have constantly been moving away from the application of brute force and limiting our use of energy only for what is necessary and keeping it that way so that we have excess resources available to us. Asparagin acid. What we're dealing with is two very, very powerful splenic gates. We're dealing with the 28th gate, the 32nd gate. One of the first things we do with having the basic equipment is that we become more ambitious. In other words, that failure then becomes one of our dynamic themes. We don't want to fail. The fact that we don't want to fail means that we're going to be looking for long-term continuity. The 32 is going to go into, ultimately, in terms of design, the 44, the fear of the past, the fear of extinction. Here in the 32, you have the root of transformation, the capacity for us to constantly be ready to transform and to be able to be a success, which is very, very important. Yet, being a success is not enough. And in this particular grouping, there is this wonderful coupling of the fears that are there in the 32 and the need to be a success and the need to avoid failure with the 28 that says, I don't care if I'm a success. I want to know why I'm here. I don't care that I have enough to eat. It's not enough for me. What's my purpose in this life? And of course, this is the magic that lies in this group. That what lies in this group is that the moment we get past the basics of being able to just maintain ourselves, the first thing that's there is, all right, fine, but what's it all about? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why do I need to be a success? Why can't I be, and on and on and on and on. In other words, that what comes out of this group is what we really are. Caught up in this question of purpose and trying to come to grips with something that denies the importance of just being able to survive. The moment you bring the 28th gate into the world is the moment that you bring the conscious recognition of death and terminality into the world. In other words, this is the recognition that survival may be nice, but all survival does is give you more time off before you die. But it doesn't stop you from dying. It doesn't stop you from coming to the end of your process. And as such, the need in us, the need within us genetically to find a purpose. This group is very beautiful in that sense. It is the real dynamic of our lives. To avoid failure, yet that in and of itself is not enough. That we need somehow to know what this is all about, that we need to struggle to find our purpose in this life.